Hello everyone, and today we are going to be looking at a list of every single Speaker of the House in American history. Now, as you guys if you're watching this video when it comes out, we just got a new Speaker, Mike Johnson, about 4 days ago, so he's about 4 days in office. And since we got a new Speaker, what the heck? Let's do a video on listing every single Speaker of the House in American history. Now, this is a position that is very, not talked about. I couldn't find any videos on YouTube of this topic. So, as far as I'm aware, I think this is the first video on YouTube listing every single Speaker of the House. So, woohoo. So there have been 62 people who have served at, well, not 62 people, but there have been 62 different, terms, as you could say, of Speaker of the House in American history. Now, we're going to be going all the way back to 1789 with the very first Speaker, Frederick Muhlenberg, right here. And we're going all the way to 2023 with the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Now, we're going to see how American politics unfolded, how American history kind of went down as these speakers are serving. Now, I'm just going to let you guys know right now, a lot of these speakers you probably have never heard of, because I haven't heard of most of them, and I'm pretty sharp with American history. At least I've been, I study up on it quite a bit. So, and I haven't heard of most of these people. So, this gives us a nice opportunity to kind of learn about some of the lesser known figures in American history. Now, you'd think the Speaker would be a way more prestigious position, being third in the line to the presidency, but, that's how the presidential line of succession goes, for those of you not aware. It's President, Vice President, and then Speaker of the House. So, we're going to see all 62 Speaker of the Houses. Now, I want to make it clear before we get started, too, that the U.S. does not agree with how many Speaker of the Houses there actually have been, because there have been several people who have served multiple times in the House. Examples like Sam Rayburn, who served 3 separate times in the House or as Speaker for over a 17-year period. He's one of the longest Speaker of the Houses they've ever been. I think that the U.S. thinks there have been 56 of them. Yeah, 56. Okay. There have been 56 individual people, but 62 terms. Kind of like how there's been 46 presidents, but only 45 men because Grover Cleveland served 2 non-consecutive terms. That's just kind of how it is here. So we're going to get started here with the very first Speaker of the House, Frederick Muhlenberg. Now, sorry if my face cam's kind of covering up some of these pictures, but you can still see them. So, I got the laser pointer whipped out already. So here's what I got. Here's kind of the format of this. So Frederick Muhlenberg, already right off the bat, you guys are probably like, who the heck is this guy? Because I don't know who he was. The very first Speaker of the House. So up here we have the number Speaker they are, the number term. Speaker of the House only gets 2-year terms as Speaker. And it's usually less than that because 1 year in the House of one term in the House of Representatives is only 2 years. And since 1789, the very first Congress was created. Since then, there have been a total of 118 different Congresses. So every 2 years in American history, you'll have a new Congress. So the first 2 years was 1789 to 1791. You have the first Congress, and then you have the second Congress from 1791 to 1793. And that all goes up today. 2023, they're all in odd years. 2023, January 3rd, started the 118th Congress. The 117th Congress lasted from 2021 to 2023. So every 2 years, you have another Congress. So there's been 118 in American history because one term in the House is only 2 years, as opposed to in the Senate, a term is 6 years, and then President of the United States term is 4 years. So different terms there. And the way the House works is every representative in the House, each state has a different amount of representatives based on the population of the state. There's 435 total members, and each individual person that they represent a different district, congressional district within the state. So some states have more than others. So states like California, New York, or Florida, for example, we have a lot of people like Texas and those kind of states have a lot more seats in the House than states like Wyoming or North Dakota because there's not many people there. So that's what we have. We have the state of representation, the number of Congress they served over. I have Congress and then multiple in parentheses because a lot of the speakers are presided over multiple Congresses because they serve longer. 2 years is just the minimum amount unless something else happens. The political party they served with because they are affiliated with political parties. We have the lifespan of the person and then some other offices that they held just to show you some more of their prominence that they may have served in Washington, D.C. These are all federal offices except for state-level executive offices. So I put, like, if they were governor of a state, I put it on there as well. So let's get started here. Frederick Muhlenberg. So he took office on April the 1st, 1789. So as you know, 1789 in American government is basically where everything goes down. The Constitution is officially ratified in 1787. But it takes them a couple years to really get it going. It was written in 1787, but it took them a couple years to get it fully ratified by every state. So by the time we get to 1789, just about all 13 states are on board with it. Now, George Washington did not take office as President of the United States until April 30th of 1789. So Frederick Muhlenberg was already Speaker of the House before George Washington was even President of the United States. So that's kind of saying something. And then once Washington got in there, you get the first cabinet secretary and all that stuff. You get all the first cabinet departments. The first originals were Secretary of State, Treasury, and War, and the Attorney General, Vice President, yada, 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 those types of offices. And then the House and Senate. So Frederick Muhlenberg was chosen to be the very first Speaker of the House. As previously, he was part of the Continental Congress during when Britain still controlled the colonies. He was part of the British Continental Congress, which was kind of like the Congress for the colonial part of the British government that governed over the colonies. He was also a U.S. Constitution framer, signed the Constitution, and was there when it was written and helped put in some of the ideas. And he also served in the Pennsylvania state legislature during its early years. So he presided over the first Congress, and he was from Pennsylvania. That was the state that he represented. So obviously Pennsylvania, pretty influential overall. Early on, the Constitution was written in Philadelphia, as you know, and so the Declaration was also signed there. He was unaffiliated with any political party because if you know anything about the early American history, in 1789 through 1791, when Frederick Muhlenberg was Speaker of the House, there were no political parties yet. Political parties didn't start to form until about the late 1790s, and then the political parties that we know today, the Democratic, Republican, didn't really start until like the 1860s. So for the early decades of American history, we're going to be dealing with some parties that you guys probably are not very familiar with. But it wasn't until like the mid to late 1790s when we actually get political parties starting to form. But right now, 1789 through 1791, there are no parties. He lived 51 years from 1750 to 1801. So, I mean, kind of average for the time. Not particularly long. But a good thing to note is almost every single government office, the term expired on March 4th, all the way until the 22nd Amendment was passed, I believe in 1933. So, between 1789 and 1933, the political office of the Speaker of the House is going to end on March 4th. But they won't all get in on March 4th because the voting process takes a long time to do. So 1791, March 4th is when he gets out of there as Speaker. The second Speaker of the House is a man named Jonathan Trumbull Jr. He was from Connecticut, and he presided over the Second Congress from October 24th, 1791 through March 4th of 1793. So as you can see, you're probably like, oh, how come he didn't take office on March 4th? Well, in the early years of the U.S. House of Representatives, the Speaker transition was not really... I don't think the Speaker of the House was really seen as a prestigious office as it is today. It was more or less just kind of like a thing that was there, so no one really rushed in to get a Speaker. So the voting process often took... it was only voted within the Congress, but it often took months for them find a new speaker. So as you can see, between March and October, there was a 7-month period in 1791 where there was no Speaker of the House, and that is going to continue for years and years and years, for centuries. That's just how it's going to be. So a term as a representative is only 2 years, but a lot of these speakers served less than 2 years, less than a year and a half. A lot of them served for a year and 3 months, because he took office at the end of 1791 and he got out in the beginning of 1793. So he really did not serve very long, and obviously did not get reelected. Previously, he served as governor of Connecticut and a U.S. senator. So he was a senator and a governor of Connecticut as well. So he probably didn't see Speaker of the House being that high of a position for him. He was also unaffiliated, as with the early 1790s not having political parties under Washington's administration. You could argue the political parties that existed at the time were pro-administration or anti-administration, but I didn't put those on here because it's really not really, pretty much, they're not affiliated. Frederick Muhlenberg actually ends up coming back to preside over the Third Congress from 1793 to 1795. So he doesn't get until December 1793 back in there. Like we said before, he was a Continental Congressman and a Constitution framer. The fourth, I don't want to make this too terribly long, so some of these guys we might need to talk a little less about. But the fourth Speaker of the House was a man named Jonathan Dayton. He started out unaffiliated. He presided over the 4th and 5th Congresses. As you can see up here, I have them in Roman numerals because Roman numerals are epic, and that's how we do things around here. He was from New Jersey, and he was also a Constitution framer. I believe he signed the Constitution, and he was a U.S. Senator as well. He started out unaffiliated, but he did, once Washington left office, they created political parties. So Washington left office in 1797. Immediately following that, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist parties were created. So he ended up becoming a Federalist later on. So I believe for his first term, from 1795 to 1797, he was unaffiliated, and then he was a Federalist from 1797 to 1799. So he was in there from 1795 to 1799, 2 terms as Speaker of the House. So he was... But also, there's no term limits. It's just however much you get reelected. 4th and 5th, there were no term limits for any offices back in these days. 4th and 5th Congresses, he was from New Jersey. So there's Jonathan Dayton. Now moving on to the 19th century, we have Theodore Sedgwick, the 5th Speaker of the House. So he resided over the 6th Congress. He was from Massachusetts, and he was also a Federalist, just like Dayton. And he served from 1799 to 1801, like I said, through the 6th Congress. And then I think the date, because it was almost always first week of December, I think that date had something to do with the day of the week that the Speaker had to take office on. I think that was probably what it was. He lived 66 years from 1746 to 1813. As you can see, Constitution framer and a U.S. Senator as well. A lot of these early guys were very influential. Next Speaker, the 6th Speaker of the House was Nathaniel Macon. Nathaniel Macon is pretty famous in American in early history for the United States. He was a U.S. Senator. He served as Speaker of the House for 3 terms, residing over the 7th, 8th, and 9th Congresses. He was from North Carolina, and he was the very first Democratic Republican to serve as Speaker of the House. He was Speaker from 1801 to 1807. Like I said, 3 terms in the House there for him. Next up, we have Joseph Bradley Varnum, the 7th Speaker of the House. He was a Democratic Republican again from Massachusetts. He presided over the 10th and 11th Congresses, and he previously served as U.S. Senator, and he presided from 1807 to 1811. So, the Speaker of the House obviously is kind of the position. It's like it's basically the top position that anyone can have in the legislative branch. You kind of get to open debates within the House, and you get a big hammer, and you're kind of in control of how things are done in the House. Henry Clay is pretty famous. Probably the first speaker on this list that most people have probably heard of because they worshipped him like a god. Henry Clay previously served as U.S. Senator. Actually, later he did. He was pretty young his first term. He was Speaker of the House twice, 2 separate times. The first one from 1811 to 1814, presiding over the 12th and 13th Congresses. Now, as you can see, his term ended on January 19th I'm not sure what circumstances led to that. I don't know if he got kicked out or what happened, or if he just chose to resign, but he's coming back. He was born in 1777, so when he took office in 1811, he was only 34 years old when he became Speaker. So pretty interesting there. He was also Democratic Republican, and he was from Kentucky. Langdon Cheves. You'll notice there'll be a lot of speakers from Kentucky. Langdon Cheves presided over the 13th Congress from 1814 to 1815. So really, he really just finished out Henry Clay's term. So they just kind of got him in replacement immediately and to finish the rest of that term. So he was only in office for a little over a year. He lived to be 80 years old, 1776 to 1857. He was a U.S. congressman, just serving in the House. He didn't have any other positions. He was from South Carolina and a Democratic Republican. Henry Clay's back. As you can see, he residing over the 14th, 15th, and 16th Congresses from 1815 to 1820. So October 28th, 1820. He quit again, so he got out, or he got kicked out. I'm not sure exactly what happened with that. But he was a Democratic Republican also from Kentucky. So right after he got out of there, his replacement was John W. Taylor, who finished off residing over the 16th Congress. He was from New York, Democratic Republican, and he was there from 1820 to 1821. Also previously a U.S. Congressman. Now, Philip Barbour was the 12th Speaker of the House, residing over the 17th Congress from 1821 to 1823. He was also Democratic Republican. There was a huge push for Democratic Republicans over the Federalists around this time. The U.S. government and politics within the United States was completely demolished by Democratic Republicans. It was just, they were all over the place. That's pretty much who controlled everything. He was a U.S. Congressman, a Supreme Court. He was actually a Supreme Court Justice, I believe the only Speaker of the House to serve on the Supreme Court as well. So pretty interesting there. That's an interesting stat. Oh, Henry Clay's back for a third time. He presided over the 18th Congress from 1823 to 1825. Henry Clay's insane because he was Speaker of the House, Senator from Kentucky, but he was never President of the United States. He ran for President like 4 times and lost all 4 times. So pretty crazy, but they worshipped him like a god, man. Like Henry Clay, holy crap. So he was actually there. He got a little bit of a bonus. He got a bonus 2 days. He actually got out on March 6th, 1825, and not March 4th. John Taylor came back. John W. Taylor's back this time to actually have his own term as Speaker instead of just fulfilling Henry Clay's previous term. He presided over the 19th Congress from 1825 to 1827, and he was from New York, like we said previously, and he was part of the National Republican Party. So most people don't know what the National Republican Party is. Basically, in the mid-1820s, when the so-called corrupt bargain election happened, which was what Andrew Jackson called the election of 1824, because basically that election was crazy because Andrew Jackson, I think, won the popular vote, but John Quincy Adams ended up becoming president because it was a 4-way race between William Crawford, Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams, and Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, and there was no majority, so the final vote had to go to the House of Representatives, and they chose John Quincy Adams to be president. Andrew Jackson was not happy about that. So you kind of had 2 different parties spring off from this. The pro-Adams party was the National Republican Party, so John W. Taylor did support John Quincy Adams, which makes sense because he was serving in the House at the time of the election. He probably voted for John Quincy Adams because he got the majority of the vote. Now, that's not going to stay because the 15th Speaker was Andrew Stevenson, and he resided over the 20th, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, the 20th through 23rd Congresses. He was from Virginia, and being from that rural area, he was a Jacksonian, so he supported Andrew Jackson more than John Quincy Adams at this time. So he starts out, and he's Speaker from 1827 to 1834, and Adams is still president when Stevenson takes the throne. I mean, he takes the throne. He's freaking Speaker of the House. When Stevenson becomes Speaker, and then Andrew Jackson takes office in 1829. So he's a Jacksonian Pretty interesting there. U.S. Congressman. Now, the reason I put U.S. Congressman for all of them, because you're like, oh, obviously, they're Speaker of the House, of course they're a Congressman. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution or anywhere that says that the Speaker of the House, when they vote for him, like whoever becomes Speaker, that they have to be a member of Congress. There's nothing that says that that is a rule. If they wanted to elect me to be Speaker of the House, I would be Speaker of the House. It just has always been a congressman. They have never not done that. But just because it's not like a required thing, I put U.S. congressmen for all of their other offices because they all served in the House before they were Speaker. But it doesn't necessarily, I just want to make it clear that it doesn't necessarily have to always be that way. John Bell is next, number 16. Now, John Bell's pretty famous because John Bell actually ran for president in 1860 against Abraham Lincoln. Although 1860 election was pretty rough for most of them because it was a four-way race, just like 1824. But John Bell did run for president against Lincoln. That's what he's most known for. But he was quite younger here in 1834 to 1835. He was only put in as Speaker to finish out Andrew Stevenson's term, residing over Congress 23. He was from Tennessee, and he was a Jacksonian. He was part of the Jacksonian Party. He was born in 1796, and he was involved in U.S. politics all the way until pretty much the time he died. But he served a couple other offices here. He was a congressman, of course, U.S. Senator. He did also serve as Secretary of War under James Buchanan's administration. No. I think it was William Harrison. He served as Secretary of War under William Harrison's presidency. Now, William Harrison, obviously, for the month that he was in office, he was Secretary of War. And then quite a while into John Tyler's presidency as well. So he was Secretary of War in 1841 for Harrison. So that was kind of neat. First cabinet secretary on here. A lot of the speakers didn't really serve much outside of the legislative branch, the legislatures, because a lot of them didn't move to the executive positions. John Bell, I guess, just happened to be appointed by Harrison to be Secretary of War. Pretty good appointment there. Next up, you guys probably know this guy. James K. Polk was actually Speaker of the House, 17th president. He was the 11th president of the United States, 17th Speaker of the House. He presided over Congress 24 and 25 from 1835 to 1839. So before Polk was president, he actually served as Speaker of the House. He was a Jacksonian at first and then a Democrat later down the line. He was from Tennessee, of course. Been to his grave, and he's buried in Nashville, right on the state capitol grounds. So he was a U.S. congressman, also served as governor of Tennessee and president of the United States. So what's kind of crazy to me is James Polk is the only person in history that has served as Speaker of the House and President of the United States. The only Speaker of the House that has become President is James Polk. No other person has served both offices besides Polk, and Polk, and that's it. Which Speaker of the House is the highest position in the legislative branch, and there has been one person to serve both Chief Justice of the United States and President, which was William Howard Taft. Taft was the only person to serve the highest position in the executive branch and the judicial branch, and Polk was the highest to serve in the highest office in the legislative branch and the executive branch. Nobody has served as Chief Justice and Speaker of the House, and no one has served all three positions. I don't think. If there is, comment down below. I'm pretty sure nobody has served those. Well, I would know. No one has. It would have had to have been Polk. Polk was not Chief Justice. So, nope, never mind. No one has. Yet, maybe one day. I don't know. Could be crazy, though. Anyway, Tennessee. James Polk was from. And he was also governor of Tennessee at one point. Next up is Robert M.T. Hunter. Robert M.T. Hunter was the 18th Speaker, residing over Congress 26. He was from Virginia. The very first Whig Speaker. He was a Whig political party. That was his ideology. He was a congressman and a senator in Virginia. He served from 1839 to 1841. So that's Robert M.T. Hunter. Next up is John White. John White was another Whig. He was a Kentuckian from Kentucky as a congressman. Served over Congress 27 from 1841 to 1843. What's interesting to note to him is he got in there pretty quickly after the last one was after Robert M.T. Hunter was out of there. John White got in pretty quick, May 31st, although William Harrison was already dead. So John Tyler was president at this time. He did not live very long. I think John White is the shortest-lived Speaker of the House in history. 1802 to 1845. He only lived 43 years. Next up is John Winston Jones, number 19, the 19th Speaker of the House from 1843 to 1845, residing over Congress 28. He was also a Virginian, but instead he was actually a Democrat. He was a Democratic Speaker. Obviously previously serving as a congressman. 1791 to 1848. He lived 56 years. Next up is John Wesley Davis, the 20th Speaker. He resided over Congress 29. He was a Democrat from Indiana, and he served from 1845 to 1847. Other offices he held, quite interestingly, he was actually the governor of the Oregon Territory. Oregon didn't become a state, I don't think, until 1849 or 1853. No, it was 1859. Crap, I can't get these dates. Jeez, I forgot when Oregon became a state. Guys, I'm sorry. Oregon didn't become a state until 1859, but it was a territory for quite a while, and John Wesley Davis actually served as governor of that territory. He served one term as Speaker of the House, though. Pretty cool. Next up is going to be Robert Charles Winthrop. This guy looks freaking epic. Look at this guy right here. I mean, that's a good-looking guy up there, if I do say so myself. I mean, quite interesting. He lived 85 years, 1809 to 1894, probably the longest lived so far. He resided over Congress 30, the 30th Congress. He was a Whig from Massachusetts, and he served from 1847 to 1849. He was a senator and congressman. Next up is Howell Cobb. Now, Howell Cobb is pretty interesting. He's known for... Howell Cobb's pretty prominent in other areas. Not only because he was Speaker. Not many people know him as Speaker. He was pretty young when he was Speaker. He was born in 1815, so he was quite younger than the rest of these guys. Didn't live very long. Died in 1868. Howell Cobb is most likely known for being a major general for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Howell Cobb was, as you can see, a Democrat from Georgia, serving from 1849 to 1851. Now, Howell Cobb and a lot of other representatives and congressmen representing southern states within the 1850s joined the Confederacy later on. So Howell Cobb he became a Confederate later down the line. So he originally was a U.S. congressman. He served as governor of Alabama as well, and Secretary of the Treasury under Buchanan, I believe. So he was Secretary of the Treasury under Buchanan. And then he also served, I think it was Cobb. Yeah, Cobb was a delegate at the South Carolina Secession Convention, which happened in 1860. So he served as Secretary of the Treasury from 1857 until 1860 under Buchanan, until the southern states started to secede to conform the Confederate states, and he joined the Confederacy. So he did serve. I believe he was at the convention that he was one of the delegates chosen to be at the Secession Convention when South Carolina decided to secede as the very first state in 1860. So, but he was Speaker of the House for one term over the 31st Congress. Lynn Boyd is next, number 23. He resided over 32nd and 33rd Congresses. He was a Democrat from Kentucky, and he served two terms from 1851 to 1855. Lived from 1800 to 1859, and he was a U.S. congressman. Not too much to say about Lynn Boyd. He stayed loyal to the Union, though. Next up is Nathaniel P. Banks. Banks is another general. He was, I believe, Major General for the Union, actually, during the Civil War. So you might know these guys if you're like a Civil War guy, if you like the Civil War, you might know these guys as being some commanders during the Civil War. So Banks, along with Cobb, were both generals. But Banks was for the Union, Cobb was for the Confederacy. Obviously, Banks, previously, before the Civil War, served as Speaker of the House from 1856 to 1857. So it took them a really long time to get Banks in there. Holy crap. He was part of the American Party because the Whigs kind of gave up by this point because the Whigs never really did too well. It was the Whig Party versus the Democrats. So Banks was part of the temporary American Party, which will eventually become the Republican Party, which is like the anti-slavery party. So he was from Massachusetts. He stayed loyal to the Union, obviously being from Massachusetts. He was the governor of Massachusetts as well as U.S. congressman. So he did serve as governor of Massachusetts. Pretty cool. Next up is James Lawrence Orr. Now, James Lawrence Orr was another one of those guys like Cobb. He was... I can't remember. Did he serve? I think he was military as well. I can't really remember, though. Let me fact check myself here. Let's see if he was military during the during the Civil War. James Orr, born in 1822. Died in 1873. He didn't live very long. Only lived to be 50 years old. No, he wasn't military. Cobb was a major general. So what's interesting about him, he served in the U.S. Congress and the Confederate Congress. He actually served as a Confederate congressman. CSA congressman. So that's pretty crazy. And then he was South Carolina. No, I got that mixed up. James Lawrence Orr was the guy who was at the delegate at the South Carolina convention. Howell Cobb he may have been too. He probably was, but I don't know for sure. James Lawrence Orr was one of the leaders of the South Carolina secession meeting that they had to at the convention that they had to secede. As you can see, he was governor of South Carolina, Democrat from South Carolina, very, very pro-slavery, very, very pro-Confederacy. As you can see, after the Civil War, he served as U.S. Minister to the Russian Empire. Ulysses S. Grant actually appointed him to that position, so that was kind of interesting. Grant appointed Orr to serve as the U.S. Minister to the Russian Empire. So he even served as a diplomat later on. So pretty interesting office there. He was Speaker from 1857 to 1859, though, Orr. William Pennington is next. Now, William Pennington, these are the speakers that served during the Civil War. All of these guys are going to be probably northern states because they're the Union. William Pennington was pretty old, though. He was born in 1796 and died in 1862. He was governor of New Jersey and U.S. congressman, so he was a Republican from New Jersey, the very first Republican speaker, and he resided over the 36th Congress from 1860 to 1861, so a little bit every year. Next up is Galusha A. Grow. That is an awesome name, by the way. I've never met anybody named Galusha, but that is pretty freaking sick. Wish you'd see. I wish the name Galusha was still used. I wish you'd still see names like that, like crazy like that all the time. Yeah, there were some wicked names back in the 1800s. I guess that name just got out of popularity. He was a U.S. congressman. He was the first guy to live into the 20th century, so 1823 to 1907. He was 83 when he died. He was a Republican from Pennsylvania from 1861 to 1863, July 4th to March 4th. Next up is Schuyler Colfax. Schuyler Colfax, pretty cool guy as well. He was 28th Speaker, residing over 3 Congresses, the 38th, 39th, and 40th Congresses. He was a Republican from Indiana, serving from 1863 to March 3rd of 1869. Now, Schuyler Colfax actually did end up becoming Vice President of the United States. People probably know that, or actually most people don't know who Schuyler Colfax is, but he was Vice President under Ulysses S. Grant for his first term until 1873. So Grant took office on March 4th, 1869. So Schuyler Colfax was actually sitting Speaker when he was elected Vice President in the United States. So that's pretty interesting. He was elected Vice President while he was sitting Speaker of the House. So his term as Vice President started on March 4th, 1869. So he actually he resigned his office a day before he became Vice President of the United States, which before he became vice president. Now, this happened because of it. The 29th speaker was a man named Theodore M. Pomeroy, also resided over Congress, the 40th Congress. He was a Republican from New York, and he was the shortest-serving Speaker of the House in American history. He was Speaker of the House for 1 day. March 3rd, 1869 to March 4th, 1869. And you're probably like, how the heck did that happen? Well, you see, Pomeroy was chosen to be the replacement for Schuyler Colfax. Now, as you know, on odd years on March 4th, the term expires. Well, Theodore Pomeroy was elected to be Speaker to fill in for Schuyler Colfax, but Pomeroy's term expired the next day on March 4th, 1869. And he was not reelected to be Speaker again. So, he ended up serving 1 day and is the shortest serving Speaker of the House in American history. Next up is James G. Blaine. James Blaine is pretty cool too. Blaine actually ran for president against against Grover Cleveland in 1884. Did lose that election, sadly, though. He was, so you might know him from that. He resided over Congress 41, 42, and the 43rd Congresses. He was a Republican from Maine, and he was Speaker for 3 terms from 1869 to 1875, so pretty good there. He was a senator, and he also served as Secretary of State under James A. Garfield's administration. Funny enough, that a lot of people probably don't know, is James G. Blaine was actually with Garfield when Garfield was shot at the Baltimore Potomac Railroad Station in July of 1881. So when Garfield was assassinated, James G. Blaine was actually there with him in the train station when he was shot. So Blaine recalled a lot of those stories and was one of the eyewitnesses of Charles Guiteau shooting Garfield. Obviously, Garfield had a terrible death. I mean, like 2 months. The doctors basically killed him. I mean, that's a story for another day, but man, that is one crazy thing with Garfield. I actually read a whole book on that. I don't read books, so I thought it was pretty interesting. So yeah, that was James G. Blaine. He was Secretary of State under Garfield, ran for president as the Republican nominee in 1884, but lost to Grover Cleveland, which is kind of crazy because this is a time in American politics where it was dominantly ran by Republicans. And he was one of the 2 people to lose to a Democrat in the late 1800s. So the only other guy being, I guess, Benjamin Harrison. But Benjamin Harrison lost to Grover Cleveland the second time in 1892, but he had already served. So Blaine was like one of the only Republican presidential candidates that did not win this time period. So that kind of sucks for Blaine, but he was still a pretty cool guy. Next up is the 30th Speaker of the House. Oh, geez. Okay, there's 2 30s for some reason. This is all out of whack. Okay, guys, whoa. Okay, I completely messed this up. Michael Kerr. Ignore the numbers. It is not accurate. Okay, Michael C. Kerr served as, I guess, the 31st Speaker of the House from 1875 to 1876. He resided over the 44th Congress. He was a Democrat from Indiana. So, Democrat. And he actually died in office. He's the very first of quite a few, actually, later on, Speaker of the Houses that died in office. So he was only Speaker for like 8 months, from December of 1875 to August of 1876. He died at 49 years old, 1827 to 1876. That's all he lived, 49 years. So kind of sad with Michael Kerr, but yeah, he was the first Speaker of the House to die in office. Next up is Samuel J. Randall. Samuel J. Randall he had 3 terms as Speaker. He was a Democrat from Pennsylvania, residing over the 44th, 45th, and 46th Congresses. Obviously, he was originally put in to fulfill Kerr's position as Speaker, but then he was reelected 2 more times. Twice more. He lived from 1828 to 1890, and he served from 1876 to 1881. Next up is going to be J. Warren Keifer. J. Warren Keifer was a Republican from Ohio, and he was residing over the 47th Congress. So he was in there from 1881 to 1883. He's the second longest living Speaker of the House. He lived 96 years from 1836 all the way to 1932. Pretty crazy. Yeah, Republican from Ohio. John J. Warren Keifer. Next up is John G. Carlisle. John G. Carlisle he was a Democrat from Kentucky, and he resided over Congress, the 48th, 49th, and 50th Congresses. He served from 1883 to 1889, and he was a senator, and he was also Secretary of the Treasury. I think probably during Grover Cleveland's presidency, but I'm not sure. Who did he serve as Secretary of the Treasury under? I think it was probably Cleveland. But let me see, because Cleveland's like the only Democratic president at the time. John G. Carlisle. Secretary of the Treasury. Trying to see who he served under. It was yes, it was under Grover Cleveland for a second term. Very cool, very cool. John G. Carlisle. Next up is going to be Thomas Brackett Reed. Now, Thomas Brackett Reed was Speaker from 1889 to 1891, residing over Congress 51, but he actually had... He came back later. This wasn't his only time as Speaker. He was a Republican from Maine. And then you had Charles... Well, if anybody knows anything about Gaming Club, we do have a Speaker, Reedy Bowling, in Gaming Club right now, current Speaker of the House. But there was actually in the United States a Speaker Reed, Thomas Brackett Reed. So, Reedy Bowling, if you're watching this right now, I don't know if he's the current Speaker of the House or the Gaming Club. There was a Speaker Reed. So, that's kind of interesting. Next up is Charles Frederick Crisp. I heard he was a pretty crispy guy. I mean, it's a crispy painting. I mean, look how crisp his head looks there. Anyways, he was resided over Congress, the 52nd and 53rd Congresses. He was a Democrat from Georgia, which would have been like in the 1850s, but this is the 1890s, so he's a good guy now, I think. He died a year after he left office, though. He was in there from 1891 to 1895. Next up is Reed. Speaker Reed is back. Speaker... And he served from the 54th and 55th Congresses. He was also, again, a Republican from Maine, 1895 to 1899. Now we're moving on to the next century, the 20th century, with David B. Henderson residing over the 56th and 57th Congresses. He was a Republican from Iowa. So Iowa's a pretty interesting state. There have been, out of all the speakers of the House, 24 states have been represented. So he was a U.S. Congressman previously, 1899 to 1903. Next up is Joseph Gurney Cannon. Joseph Gurney Cannon's kind of a legend, because this guy was one of the longest servings up to this point. He lived 90 years from 1836 to 1926, and he was a Republican from Illinois, residing over the 58th, 59th, 60th, and 61st Congresses. So Joseph Gurney Cannon's pretty cool there. You'll notice now that we're into the 1900s, a lot of these speakers are going to be in there for a lot longer than the ones in the 1800s because they were like fishing them out like crazy. But there are actually a lot more that die in office. I think only one speaker died in office in the 1800s and like 3 or 4 in the 1900s did. So there we go. Next up is Champ Clark. I don't think his name was actually Champ. I think it was like Charles or something. I don't really know for sure. But he was a U.S. Congressman, a Democrat from Missouri. He resided over the 62nd, 63rd, 64th, and 65th Congresses from 1911 to 1919. And then we get Frederick H. Gillette. So Gillette here resided over Congress 66, 67, and 68. He was a Republican from Massachusetts, and he was also a U.S. Senator, serving from 1919 to 1925 as Speaker of the House. Next up is the man, Nicholas Longworth, another Republican from Ohio, just like Keifer that we had previously. He resided over the 69th Congress Speaker. I mean, that's saying something with this guy. Let's go Longworth for smash, 69th Congress. and also the 70th and 71st Congress as well. U.S. Congressman. 1925 to 1931 as Speaker. Next up is, kind of familiar, John Nance Garner actually served as Speaker of the House. Just like Schuyler Colfax, he was Vice President of the United States and actually elected Vice President. He was elected Vice President as he was sitting Speaker, so that's pretty cool. He was a Democrat from Texas. He served as Vice President under Franklin Roosevelt for his first two terms from 1933 to 1941. Jeez, I couldn't think of that. From 1933 to 1941, he was in there for his first two terms. And then Roosevelt eventually got Henry A. Wallace and then Truman later down the line. So, but when Garner served one term as Speaker, residing over the 72nd Congress. So, that's pretty cool. He's the longest-lived Speaker of the House. He lived 98 years, from 1868 to 1967, dying just about 2 weeks shy of his 99th birthday. He was born in November 22nd of 1868, and he died on November 7th, 1967. So, pretty crazy. But he's mainly known for being Vice President of the United States. So, there have been two speakers in American history to serve as Vice President, those two being Schuyler Colfax and John Nance Garner. And ironically, both of them were elected Vice President as they were sitting Speaker. So that's kind of interesting. There's John Nance Garner. Next up is going to be Henry Thomas Rainey. Henry Thomas Rainey is the second Speaker to die in office. He was only in office for about a year and 4 months, or a year and 5 months. He died on August 19th, 1934. He was a Democrat from Illinois, residing originally over the 73rd Congress. And he took office on March 9th of 1933 and died on August 19th, 1934. He was 73 when he died, so pretty dang old. One of the oldest government officials serving at that time. It was pretty rare that long ago to be in your 70s serving in the U.S. government. Nowadays, that's pretty common for people to be in their 70s and sometimes even 80s now in the U.S. government, but back in the 1930s, if you were in your 70s, that was pretty old. So that was Henry Thomas Rainey, so he did end up dying in office, sadly. Next up is Joe Burns. Joe Burns also died in office as well. He resided over the 74th Congress. So there was no one. After Rainey died, there was the position of Speaker of the House was vacant until they got Joe Burns in there in 1935. So Joe Burns was the first Speaker to actually take office on January 3rd. So by this point, the 22nd Amendment has been ratified, making it so that it changes the inaugural dates for both Congressmen and the President. It makes the Congressional inauguration date January 3rd and the presidential inauguration day January the 20th. So President is now inaugurated on January 20th, and the Speaker of the House and all congressmen on January 3rd. It previously been March 4th for all of them, but it's earlier now. So that's a U.S. Congressman. Here's a U.S. Congressman. Joe Burns, Democrat from Tennessee, dies in office on June 4th, 1936 at 66 years old. Next up is, I think I did 2 slides with Joe Burns, William Bankhead, who, you guessed it, also died in office. We had three back-to-back, 3 speakers in a row who died in office, but Bankhead actually served 3 terms as Speaker. He resided over the 74th, 75th, and 76th Congresses. Well, he actually really only served 1 full term because he was originally put in to replace Joe Burns, who had previously died, and then Bankhead gets in there, and then he dies 4 years later. So he serves over the second part of the 74th Congress and the first part of the 76th Congress, but all the 75th Congress. He was a Democrat from Alabama. He was also 66 years old when he died, just like Burns there. So Rainey, Burns, and Bankhead all died in office, 3 in a row. But now we're going to get the legendary, the longest-serving Speaker of the House in American history, Sam Rayburn. Now, Sam Rayburn served 3 separate times as Speaker. The first time, he was a Democrat from Texas. He lived from 1882 to 1961, so a very long time. This was taken during his later term. The first time he was Speaker was for 7 years, which is still pretty good. He got in there as a replacement after Bankhead died. Rayburn did not die in office, but he served originally presiding over the 76th, 77th, 78th, and 79th Congresses. But we haven't seen the rest of him. Next up is Joseph W. Martin Jr. This is also not the last we'll see of him. It was kind of like in the 1940s and 1950s, Rayburn and Martin were kind of like battling for Speaker of the House. Martin was a Republican from Massachusetts. He resided over the 80th Congress. He lived from 1884 to 1968, 83 years. He was a congressman. His first term as Speaker was from 1947 to 1949. Sam Rayburn is back in here. He serves 2 terms. His second time from 1949 to 1953, residing over Texas, Democrat from Texas, residing over Congress, the 81st and 82nd Congresses. And then we get Martin back in again, residing over the 83rd Congress from 1953 to 1955. But then Sam Rayburn comes back for a third time and resides over for the next 6 years from residing over the 84th, 85th, 86th, and 87th Congresses. So Sam Rayburn served originally from 1940 to 1947, so that's 7 years, and then from 1949 to 1953, that's 4 more years, makes 11, and then 1955 to 1961, that's 6 more years, making a total of 17 years as Speaker of the House. Sam Rayburn holds that record for the longest serving Speaker of the House in history. Not the longest one term, though, but the longest, total time as Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn. So that's pretty nice. That's pretty cool. Next up is going to be John W. McCormack. Now, McCormack was in there for quite a while, too. Rayburn actually died. No, he did die in office. Shoot. I forgot he died in office, so he would have actually served longer. So he was actually elected to serve until 1963. Oh my gosh, I didn't know Rayburn actually died in office. Okay, he did. Here we go, the Speaker. So Rayburn eventually did die in office in 1961 at the age of 79 years during the 87th Congress. So that's pretty cool, interesting. Next up is John W. McCormack. So I was wrong. Sorry, I said he didn't die in office. Rayburn did die in office. So there were 5 speakers that died in office. Kerr, Raines, Rayburn, and then the Bankhead and I forgot the other one, Burns. They all died in office. Next up is John W. McCormack. McCormack was in there for a long time. He lived from 1891 to 1980, 88 years. He was a Democrat from Massachusetts, and he was a lot of Massachusetts and Kentucky speakers. He was in there from 1962 to 1971, residing over the 87th Congress, 88th, 89th, 90th, and 91st Congresses. So he eventually was used as a replacement for Rayburn, but then he was reelected 4 more times. So that's pretty cool. John McCormack, Speaker of the House. Next up is Carl Albert. Carl Albert was known as the little giant, I think was what he was known as. Because he was a pretty short guy, but he had some power. That is not the abbreviation for January. He lived from 1908 to 2000, 91 years. He was from Oklahoma, Democrat from Oklahoma, residing over the 92nd, 93rd, and 94th Congresses from 1971 to 1977. 3 terms. Next up is Tip O'Neill. A lot of people know Tip O'Neill. He's pretty famous. 10 years as Speaker. I think Tip O'Neill holds the record for longest, one-term Speaker. The longest, total time without leaving office, which was 10 years for Tip O'Neill. So that's pretty cool. He served 10 full years there. He was a Democrat from Massachusetts, residing over the 95th, 96th, 97th, 98th, and 99th Congresses. He lived from 1912 to 1994. 81 years. Tip O'Neill. Next up is Jim Wright. Jim Wright just died a couple of years ago. He died about 8 years ago. He was 92 and he died, born in 1922, died in 2015. And he resided over, he was a Democrat from Texas from 1987 to 1989, one term residing over Congress 100 and 101, because I think he must have resigned. I think he resigned in the middle of his second term there. So he did reside over Congress 100 and 101st Congress, the 100th and 101st Congresses. So that's Jim Wright. He just died in 2015, 92 years old. Speaker of the House. Next up is Tim Foley. Tim Foley was Speaker for 6 years, from 1989 to 1995. He was a Democrat from Washington, residing over the 101st, 102nd, and 103rd Congresses. Other than being a congressman, he actually served as U.S. Ambassador to Japan, I believe, under Bill Clinton or Obama. I can't remember. I think it was Clinton for his second term. I think Clinton appointed him, or Obama. It was one of those two. So that's pretty cool. Ambassador to Japan, Tim Foley. Ambassador to Japan. Next up is Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich is actually still alive. He's 80 years old. He was a Republican from Georgia. He resided over the 104th and 105th Congresses. 105th Congresses. He was in there from 1995 to 1999. He actually, that's what happened there. 4 years. Next up is Dennis Hastert. Dennis Hastert is also still alive. He was born in 1942, making him 81 years old. He resided over the 106th, 107th, 108th, and 109th Congresses. He was a Republican from Illinois, serving for most of George W. Bush's years, from 1999 to 2007. Next up is Nancy Pelosi, the very first and only female Speaker of the House. She previously was a U.S. Congresswoman, still is to this day. She served She served two non-consecutive times in the House, or as Speaker of the House. She was born in 1940, making her 83 years old today. She just left office this year. She resided originally, the first time, over the 110th and 111th Congresses. She's a Democrat from California. Democrat from California, serving from 2007 to 2011. First time, 2007 to 2011. And then we have John Boehner. John Boehner was Speaker from 2011 to 2015. He was born in 1949, making him about 74 years old now. He was a Republican from Ohio, and he resided over the 112th, 113th, and 114th Congresses. So Republican from Ohio, John Boehner. There we go, Speaker of the House. Next up is Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan was a Republican from Wisconsin, residing over the 114th and 115th Congresses. So something happened 8 years ago today, October 29th. John Boehner was removed from office for whatever reason. I think he might have left office. But Paul Ryan, there he is, 2015 to 2019. So he finished out Boehner's term and then was reelected again 2 times. No, once. U.S. Congressman. He was born in 1970, making him about 53 years old today. Next up is, as you can see, Nancy Pelosi is back, residing over, she served 2 extra terms as Speaker of the House, residing over the 116th and 117th Congresses of the United States from 2019 to 2023, January 3rd, 2023. Now, the next speaker is Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy is one of the shorter serving speakers. He was only in there from January to October of 2023 because he was just recently voted out of office. He was born in 1965. He was a Republican from California. And I think, is that right? Is he from California? Hold on, I got to check that. I don't know if that's right. What state? It might be. No, he's from California, whatever. residing over the 118th Congress. So he was just removed on October 3rd, 2023, and now on October 25th, we got our final and current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He was born in 1972, making him about 51 years old, and he's a Republican from Louisiana. So he is currently finishing out McCarthy's term, which will last until January 3rd of 2025. So that is going to be, that is right there, every single Speaker of the House in American history, from Frederick Muhlenberg all the way to Mike Johnson. So let me know what you guys thought about that in the comments below. Who is your favorite Speaker of the House? And who do you think, what do you think about Mike Johnson, the new Speaker? Very cool, guys. So that's the 118th Congress. He currently resides over. The 119th will obviously be from 2025 to 2027, and so on and so forth after that. 120th and 2027 to 2029. So we'll have to see how long Mike Johnson's in there. He could break a record. Who knows? I mean, we don't really know. So Mike Johnson's the current Speaker of the House, and that is a list of every single Speaker of the House in American history. Thank you guys for watching. And with all that said and done, be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Let me know who your favorite Speaker of the House is down in the comments, down there below. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye. Wah!